In 1995, the New Hampshire Furniture Masters, based out of Concord, New Hampshire, was formed. This organization now includes a group of 20-plus fine furniture makers and builders, all from various places in New England. This year, the New Hampshire Furniture Masters are celebrating 30 years. I'd like to dedicate this film to the New Hampshire Furniture Masters. Congratulations to them and their success and the loyalty to the craft of studio furniture making. Studio furniture is made one piece at a time in the furniture maker's studio, as opposed to a high-volume, mass-produced facility. The studio furniture makers you're about to meet are considered some of the finest craftsmen in their field. The gallery at Sohm Sound is proud to represent these fine artisans.
I've always been artistically inclined. Always liked to draw, cartooning and stuff like that as, in school with my buddies. But when my family moved to Canterbury, we moved to live in the Shaker Village where my stepfather was the curator there. We lived right on the ground, so I was immediately encompassed and saturated with Shaker architecture, history, design. Even 6 of the last Shakers were still living then. And immediately down the street, my next door neighbor was a man named Alejandro de la Cruz. We're in his workshop right now. So this is where I was apprenticed, and he asked me if I would be interested in learning the trade. And I haven't looked back. And that was in the early to mid 70s. So it's been over 50 years.
My very first woodworking project was when I was 6 years old. My father was building a garage on the side of our house, and I picked up a 6-inch long piece of 2x4 and nailed a 16-penny nail in the top of it for an antenna and drew a little speaker on the front for my walkie-talkie. I remember it fondly. In high school, I did not take a college prep course. I was working in the machine shop because the wood shop was full of all the hoodlums in the school.
Despite all the hoodlums in the woodworking shop at Joe's school, Joe Tracy was not discouraged and continued to explore the world of furniture making. After high school, Joe took a trip to the Smithsonian for the Objects USA show, which left a lasting impression, and that's where his career decisions began.
I went up to the show thinking to spend a pleasant day and walked out of there knowing exactly what I wanted to do, which was building furniture. And I've been building furniture for the last 45 years.
I started art way back in grade school. In addition to that, my parents sent me to after-school art programs. And then in junior high school and high school, my teachers coached me along really well. I took it seriously, and, that helped me in college.
Duncan Gowdy experienced many facets to the art of design. After being instructed by 5 different teachers at UMass Dartmouth, Duncan finally found his niche in carving and sculptured furniture.
It was a roller coaster, but I benefited from it because of all the different perspectives that I learned from.
I studied architecture for my undergraduate education, and then I went to art school and studied architecture. And then I worked for architect firm as an intern, sometimes paid, sometimes unpaid. But I soon realized that the architect wasn't quite the maker and more like a designer. And then I started looking around back in Japan, and then I found this woodworking school in rural area, Takayama City. And there was an examination and interview, and luckily I passed it. And then that day one, I walking into the wood shop, and just the smell of it, and the landing machine, cutting some wood. That day one, I just felt it. This is it.
I think the biggest motivator was a desire to work with my hands that goes back to such an early time in my life. I had 4 siblings, so it was a busy household. And I would have a little workshop in the basement where I would just tinker away and make things and just bring a lot of joy to my life. Later, after I graduated from college, I moved to Seattle in 1985. And moving to Seattle, I was introduced to an incredible scene of people making furniture and doing that as their livelihood, which was something I never imagined was a possibility.
Well, I had one woodworking class in college, and I've always liked to make things. And at the time, it was the Back to the Land movement, and people were building handmade houses. I made some furniture around 1972, and also I was into musical instruments and tinkering with musical instruments, and just figuring my way around those sort of woodworking problems. I later went into working on old houses, and the guys I worked with, they were passionate about the wood, which was transferred to me. Also, they saw that I had patience, which is something I probably inherited from my mother, but they would stick me with the difficult, problem jobs, because they knew that I would just sort of stick with it and figure my way out.
When I was 5 years old, my mom could see that I had a really strong interest in art. I loved going to the Currier Museum in Manchester, and she enrolled me in the children's program. I was on fire. I just absolutely loved it. Ceramics and painting and drawing and all that. That's really what I liked. But it wasn't until late elementary school and stuff where I wanted to consider and began considering that I would someday be a full-time artist, In my latter years of high school, my dad was a physician, and he wanted all of his kids, all 5 of us, to be physicians. And he was a little uneasy about one of his progeny becoming a visual artist, because, for obvious reasons. So my parents agreed to take me down to Boston University and give me some vocational testing. At the end of it, they said, not only should you go to art school, but you should consider Rhode Island School of Design and Rochester Institute of Technology, which had a very notable woodworking program. So I applied to both, got accepted at both, and I decided Rochester's farther away, so I'm going to go there.
John Brooks left the influence of his family in Manchester, New Hampshire, and moved to Rochester, New York, to attend RIT. There he studied and apprenticed under Wendell Castle and was very attracted to the idea that he not only could build furniture, but they were to become very sculptural and functional at the same time.
During my 3rd year at RIT, I spent in Scandinavia as a junior year abroad program, studying with James Krenov, and attended the Malmsted Workstead School at the same time. Jim Krenov lived in a small house in Stockholm, and he had a basement with 2 rooms, and he placed me in one of the smaller room with a workbench, and basically just had me build my own pieces, which were small at the time. I did a very small jewelry box and then a larger jewelry box. And he was in the other room and called me in now and then, and we commiserated on the designs that he was doing at the time. He wanted to see what I thought about it, and mostly didn't take my advice, but I was honored that he asked anyhow.
Joe Tracy had the rare opportunity of being instructed by 2 of the founders of the studio furniture movement, Wendell Castle at RIT and James Krenov in Stockholm, Sweden, before Krenov moved to the U.S. to start the woodworking school College of the Redwoods, which is located at Fort Bragg, California. The 2 instructors had very different styles and teaching skills. Over the years, Joe has been able to marry those 2 styles and come up with his own unique style in design of studio furniture. Tim Coleman was also strongly influenced and inspired by James Krenov. The impact that Krenov had on Tim really influences his design aesthetic and furniture style to this day.
to see how Jim worked through a lot of the same struggles and dilemmas that we were all encountering as well, choices that you have to make, how he chose to use the material. Jim talked a lot about how different types of shaping you might do with the material are going to be different depending on the wood that you're working with. Jim talked about composing as a way to approach design. That was having a strong idea of the piece you want to make, but building in flexibility to the process. So perhaps you had a strong notion that you wanted this curvature, but the wood is saying, oh no, actually it needs to be more subtle than that. It needs to be a different type of curve. And so being able to respond to the way the material is wanting to be expressed and not force it. So that was a valuable experience, seeing him at work.
With Jim and his sensitivity to the material and the grain pattern, colors, and the subtle forms, I think I was a lot more inspired.
And my master, his name is Shoji Osamu. He learned woodworking from James Krenov. The master in Japan, there is not such a good enough. He did not have that good enough in his dictionary. So either good or bad. So he is kind of perfectionist, and I learned that such a way there has to be everything perfect. After I moved to United States, I went to grad school at San Diego State, and then I met Wendy Maruyama. She's artist, furniture maker, designer, advocate, educator, you name it. Like, she is such a strong influence making my career path in this United States.
I think the first class I was there, Wendy said, stop making that whimsical shit. So she wanted me to focus on learning something new, which was conceptual art, which is what the program was based on. So it was a struggle for me. I made some good work. Some pieces bombed, but Wendy took me out of my comfort zone, and that helped out.
David Lamb's inspiration began at the historical Shaker village, where he grew up and was influenced by the Shaker tradition. Not soon after meeting Alejandro de la Cruz as a young man, David began his instruction, which involved the discipline of mastering certain techniques and learning the philosophy and history of design.
His bench was here and mine was right next to it. And I was here doing repetition kind of things. He'd show me how to do a certain kind of dovetail, and I did it over and over and over again. It was like taking piano lessons, where you constantly had to practice. And the idea wasn't just to prove that you could do it once, okay, time for the next thing, but that it was ingrained in you. You know, you could do it without really having to stop and think about it. And that was the kind of training I got from him, in addition to philosophy and studying design.
While David continued on to Boston University and studied furniture making under the influence of Jere Osgood and Alphonse Matea, he then learned the mastery of self-expression and discovering his own creative style of furniture making.
The environment of design school and art school in Boston was such that they were trying to pull out from you what you feel inside that you want to express. And for me, that doesn't come from one point. You know, I think my interests are quite broad, and I enjoy the classics as much as some new wave kind of approach. Yes, there were technical aspects that we learned when we were in Boston, but it was more like pulling out from inside our individual aesthetic.
The Guild of New Hampshire Woodworkers came into being, and I was a charter member of that. Jere Osgood was in that group, and Terry Moore.
Ted Blachly's career as a furniture maker really started to blossom during the time spent with Jere Osgood in his studio. The two both had the quality of patience, which was the bonding influence of their friendship.
Jere, I met him early on in the group, and I didn't know anything about him. He was this quiet workman, and he had his little cap on, and he would show up at the meetings, and I remember asking him, well, what kind of furniture do you make? And he said, well, there's a book called Contemporary American Craftsmen. And Jere was towards the latter end of that book. And once I saw that work, I was just amazed. It was so sophisticated. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Without a doubt, I wouldn't be where I was without working with Jere Osgood. And we were similar in that I mentioned the patience before. I think that was something he appreciated about me, that I was careful and sensitive to what was going on in the shop. You had to be, because you had some, $50,000 desk right behind you that he was working on, and there may be some little aspect I'm dealing with, but you really have to be careful, and he helped nurture that characteristic.
Joseph Tracy also had a wonderful personalized opportunity to apprentice with Jere Osgood. Oddly enough, his time with Jere was also in the basement, this time at RIT, similar to being in James Krenov's basement in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm not sure why, but they probably felt Joe learned the craft better by being underground.
Spent quite a few days sanding some of Jere Osgood's furniture in the basement of RIT when he was teaching there. But I was very fortunate to have a lot of excellent known craftsmen teach at RIT when I was there in the 70s.
At Rochester, I had two instructors in the woodworking department, and one of them was Bill Kaiser and the other was Wendell Castle. Wendell was just starting out the same year I was a freshman there, so we had that in common. My undergraduate degree, I worked primarily in wood, but I tried various techniques. And then when my graduate thesis came along, I started to develop my own style and was finding pieces of wood that I could carve that were from tree sections from the Genesee Valley Park in Rochester. They had this huge wood dump out there, and I could just go and find pieces and got myself some chainsaws and started carving single pieces of wood.
John Brooks and Wendell Castle bonded through the newness of being at RIT. John apprenticed under Wendell and learned the art of sculptural furniture.
I really identified with Wendell's work. I mean, he was extremely sculptural in his approach, and that's really what I wanted. I ended up apprenticing with him. I was actually his first apprentice for $1.25 an hour.
In the beginning, Duncan Gowdy started his career as a craftsman, making interior and exterior doors, which led to his blanket chest designs.
All that skill set trickled down into my work. So my blanket chest to me are essentially 4 doors put together. And then I add the panels, with the carvings. And then also just about being professional about working and good work ethic. And eventually, I had them build my studio.
It's quite interesting to note that each of these furniture makers over the years were greatly influenced by their instructors, but at the same time, they've developed their own style and aesthetic design, quite often through nature, enhancing the natural forms, the richness of the environment. You'll see the great influence in teachings from their instructors, which can be considered the undertones and subtleties of these furniture makers. But over time, they have perfected their own sense of individual style. As you spend time with their pieces, you begin to see their personality shine through their work.
I think because my background is so varied and sort of multi-layered, the influence from different aspects come into play in different pieces that I'm doing. So for instance, if I'm doing a piece that's more of a contemporary nature, a lot of those influences come from design school at Boston, where I'm doing complex laminations and things with a lot more sculptural aspect to it, where other kinds of commissions or jobs might have more of a shaker influence because of its spareness and more directness. So it kind of depends on the client, the customer, and the commission.
I think a lot of my design aesthetic was fairly well established early on, certainly influenced by Krenov and the forms that he liked to work with, the scale of his pieces in particular. There's a very human scale to his pieces. They're not large and overpowering. I like to think of it as that you can wrap your arms around one of my cabinets and hug it and walk away with it if you'd like.
Yuri has mastered the technique of steam bending. The flow of energy in her work depicts her personality and her approach on life.
I have been obsessed with exploring that steam bending technique when I started being a furniture maker in this country. It look back, my sketchbook started just like this, straight line, so like a square or a grid or lattice work. Seeing here and there people using that technique, and I met the Michael Fortune, who is excellent furniture maker, and I learned that technique from him first in this country, and that kind of led me to be more loose rather than everything has to be square or a certain angle. But I think it gave me more freedom to explore design, and I think expand my kind of artistic vocabulary.
A straight line is a missed opportunity. That was, I think, Jere Osgood's thing. He liked working with curves as well. So, and look at the way trees grow. I mean, trees are all over the place. So I search the forest for these shapes that are compelling and I feel have possibilities.
One of the big things I got from working with Jere and seeing how he worked was his process. The importance of keeping a sketchbook. And he says it's a place where you record the things that are important to you, whether it's a Hepplewhite leg or the wind blowing around the corner. And I thought there are two ideas that are very far apart. So there is a wealth of things all around us that can be drawn on for design work.
Sometimes I'm designing the piece and then finding the wood. Sometimes I'm finding the wood and allowing the wood to inspire me for the design, which is why I seek out these large pieces of wood and just keep staring at them, and sometimes they speak to me back and sometimes they don't. Other inspirations were Japanese and Chinese furniture, Scandinavian, shaker furniture, and some early American craftsmen such as the Green and Green brothers in Pasadena. Jere Osgood's furniture. I spent 3 successive years going out to Crescent City, California for a bunch of old growth curly redwood that was originally harvested back in the 1960s. It's been the inspiration for many of my pieces, as you know. Oftentimes I will make small models to give a 3-dimensional representation of what I'm proposing to build, and those are very useful sales tools.
The inspiration or things that I want to capture is based off of my feelings or thoughts or like my personal experience. That's the kind of like my jumping off point. I try not to refer too much about the existing piece of furniture, even though there are influential makers like Wendell Castle, Jere Osgood, but I try not to see their work too closely. And so rather I want to see clouds or trees or flowers or boat shape particular. I'm interested in taking that beautiful shape or form or pattern from elsewhere than an existing piece of furniture.
Nature is my greatest inspiration, without a doubt. I'm an avid gardener and love looking at plant forms through their whole cycle. I mean, I work with trees. I work with with wood, a living material, and I love being surrounded by trees. There's a strong Asian aesthetic in a lot of the work that I do, and that is very consistent with a reverence for nature. You know, understanding the material and enhancing the natural forms with deliberate choices and decisions in the way you use the material.
Yeah, so I think my studio is very important. It's where I create. I really love coming out to the shop, and sometimes I'll sit here for a while without turning the lights on and just have that morning light come on, or I'll leave the door open and listen to the birds. So it's a combination of that quiet time, being surrounded by all my patterns and the nice light coming in, And then in the back part of my studio too, with all that old machinery, I just like the aesthetic and the sense of tradition and continuity. And I feel that that really helps direct my thinking towards my work, the design aspect or the making of it. So yeah, the space, the environment, the richness of it is all a big part of it.
Beautifully described how they get their inspiration. And then there's Ted.
I like desks. I like chairs. I like tables. I like sculpture. I primarily work with solid wood construction. I am a lover of good wood, and to quote my friend Hank Gilpin, there's no bad wood. It's all good. I have to constantly integrate into my design work the fact that wood moves and expands and contracts. You know, each of us has our own sort of design language that we kind of work with.
It all boils down to the simpler things in life. Good wood and sketching everyday objects is inspiring.
Going back to grad school, Kim Kelzer said that I should abstract my ideas. So even though somebody might see like a tree or the water image on a piece of furniture, that image has something, it has a meaning to me, memory of people or a place. So that helps me make it my piece, not just taking a picture of an ordinary tree somewhere. I like to find uses for everyday objects and kind of blowing them up just at a larger scale, similar to like a Klaus Oldenburg sculpture with the coat rack that's inspired by Shaker pegboards and farming. I admire the Shaker aesthetic. With the keyhole mirror, I like looking at antique furniture, and I saw an escutcheon on a dresser and just wanted to get that at a larger scale and create it into a mirror. It kind of comes from anywhere. I might go through a long time of not finding anything, but then if I see something, I'll want to sketch it or even just do a mock-up just to see how it will look and even use it to see if it, functions well and if I could bring it to production.
There's sketching, there's scale drawing, there's full-scale drawing, which you need to actually build the piece to figure out the joinery. And the other one is full-scale mock-ups. I built a full-scale mock-up out of framing lumber that I get from the lumber yard. I go over there and I just pick out some pieces that don't have knots, and come back and pretend it's, cherry or walnut, and quickly assemble something. May need screws just to, not everyone has great three-dimensional conceiving of things. I mean, if he's doing it, it's valuable.
Right now, I'm working on a desktop lamp using, again, steam bending. And the title, I named it for Scribble. So I'm kind of using that steam bending technique to no plan. I was just trying to bend it, making coils or making a heart shape or making a tree like a shape, but it's all more abstract, and then I'm kind of play. It's playing it and making that lump out of it. So hopefully I can make it 30, 50 of them, that each one of them are totally different, just like a doodle.
This is kind of a fun piece for me because I'm making it for my wife, Janet, and she has always admired this form, which has got a lot of Shaker relevance. And this is made from a tree that I cut down on the Shaker property in the very early 1980s. So this is a curly maple, nice wide panels here with a very strong figure. Everything about this was all made from that same log. And it utilizes a lot of very traditional design elements and structural elements, like the frame and panel on the sides, dovetailed drawers, and even the bracket feet have a nice dovetailed what they call a half blind and mitered dovetail. That's all an integral joint. It's all one piece, and it looks pretty complex before it's assembled. But it's really kind of cool to be able to make it out of something that I cut down all those years ago, and sort of the full cycle of it.
So when I went up to San Diego, everything was turned around. And the Menge Museum had a exhibition that showed Shaker furniture and objects along with Japanese objects. And one of the Shaker objects was a tripod stand. And me with my literal mind saw the pedestal of the tripod and saw a wine bottle. So it's kind of ironic because the Shakers don't drink. And it's kind of a nod to my great uncle who was charismatic. He was an artist, kind of an outsider in the family, and he drank a lot.
Wood has what's called chatoyancy, and chatoyancy refers to how a change in the direction of light as it hits the wood will affect the way that wood appears. So lately I've been creating some what I call cracked ice patterns, which is a traditional Chinese design motif where the way I'm using it is often using figured maple and with geometric shapes turning the direction, the grain direction of the segments of veneer. And by doing that, some pieces appear lighter or darker relative to the others.
So through our work with the New Hampshire Furniture Masters, we have had programs where we've coordinated with the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts and utilized some of their grant programs to have students come through. So these were several months, like 6 month to 8 month programs where the student was coming here a couple of times a week and they would have a project. And I tried to do it in a way that was reminiscent of my apprenticeship. So I would have them do things in a repetitious nature. And that might have been a little frustrating because I think a lot of schools, all right, you do it once, okay, you're ready for the next one. And I wanted them to really feel like they had control over what they had to do.
The way we're mentoring or the way we're passing on is really just through conversations. We have the New Hampshire Furniture Masters group, which is a bunch of peers. Everybody's working in different sort of disciplines, but there is this exchange of information. There are some younger people that are coming into the group they're using some of the more sophisticated technology that I don't really know anything about. I keep pitching, the hand rasps and planes and stuff like that for shaping.
If I could make my living just by making, then I would probably prefer that. But at the same time, since I do have this skill that I gained over the 20 years, then I'm willing to share. So teaching is really like intimidating. But I'm happy to share what I have.
The Shaker aesthetic and environment has been instrumental in my career in the way I think and the way I design and the way I work. It brings me tremendous satisfaction to create something, to envision something, and then to see it being delivered and getting the nice smile on the customer's face when it's delivered and placed in their home. Really means a lot.
I do believe that creativity and imagination can change the world. That's the kind of like a message, or like I do strongly believe that imagination is really important, which I do a lot. Like my imagined world, I'm trying to reflect that imagined world to using that as a kind of like my intangible device to develop my design. And then also creativity is, I think, important to change the world or making a better world.